and welcome to Freaky Fridays. This week I would like to tell you a story, the rest of the Jenny Wade story. Last week I talked about the history and how Jenny was killed in the house on Baltimore Street. But this week I would like to talk about the paranormal aspect of Jenny Wade's story. There seems to be a lot of residual energy in the house on Baltimore Street, known as the Jenny Wade house, but it's actually called the McClellan house. I started being a tour guide in around 2009, and I worked for the company that managed the Jenny Wade house in the orphanage, and I had a great time. When I signed up as a guide, I wasn't sure if I believed in the paranormal or not. All I knew is that I needed a job, and it sounded like a lot of fun, and it was. It was great. Slowly, I became convinced that there is something to hauntings, ghosts, and everything paranormal. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would not believe it. But let me tell you some of the stories that happened while I was guiding in the Jenny Wade house. People would come from all around, neighboring states. It didn't matter. They came because they were curious. And we had all ages on these ghost tours. And that made it a lot of fun because you never knew who your crowd was going to be. When we started out, I would take them through the house. And remember, it's a side-by-side duplex. So we would start in on the side where Jenny was killed and talk about some things in the house. Now this house is very old. It's probably from early to mid 1800s, and there's every board and every step squeaks in that house, and I mean it squeaks very loudly too. So if someone's upstairs, you can hear it. And when we would go through the house, it was actually loud from all the footsteps throughout the house. But when it was quiet and you heard a footstep upstairs, you knew somebody was up there, but you didn't know who. And that made it all the more fun because I didn't have to do anything, the spirits would do it for me, and really scared, the people in my group. It was wonderful. There are a few items in the house that move and change, and one of them is the clock in the parlor. It's hanging on the wall, and it's a very old clock, probably from the early 1800s, and it hasn't worked in a long time. There's a tale that says when Jenny was killed, which was about 8:30 in the morning, they stopped the clock and set the hands of the clock for 8:30. This was a tradition back then. It was showing respect for the departed one. The clock is supposed to be set at 8:30 to respect Jenny, but every once in a while, that clock will start up again and the hands will move. And we don't know how or why, but it just happens that the time changes, and there's no set amount of time, no set day. And the people that manage the house will go back and put it on 8:30, and every once in a while the time will change again. That's a pretty cool thing that happens in the parlor. In the kitchen is a mannequin of a Union soldier. His name is Bill, like for Billy Yank, And every once in a while, someone will see Bill's eyes moving. When we're in there and I'm speaking and talking about what happened to Jenny, every once in a while somebody will say, "Hey, look at his eyes, they're moving. His head's moving." Now, I personally have never seen this, but these people are different every tour, so it must be true. It must be happening, I think. Behind the kitchen is a set of stairs, and they're very creaky and squeaky, and every once in a while someone will say that they see a little boy on these back stairs. And he's dressed in a white shirt and black pants with suspenders. And we're trying to figure out who this little boy might be. And we think that he might be a little boy named Willie, and he was from the orphanage up the street. Willie was treated very badly by the matron in the orphanage, and he would also often come down to see Jenny's sister, Georgia, and talk to her. And she would be kind to the kids and give them cookies and just talk and be nice. And we think Willie is still hanging out at the Jenny Wade house because he feels safe and secure there. Upstairs at the house are bedrooms, and there are chains separating the different rooms, and so people can't go in and touch the beds and the furnishings and things. And these chains are on poles, like, you know, like in a movie theater, that kind of deal. Sometimes the chains will be very still. Other times they will swing a little bit, but still other times they will go back and forth wildly. We have no explanation for that one, but it does happen quite a bit. There are also mirrors upstairs, like for a vanity type mirror, and people have taken photos in the mirror and seen images that can't be explained. Sometimes they are distorted facial features. Sometimes they are tricks of light. There's no explanation for those either. I can tell you, while I was working at the Jenny Wade house, just about every one of my tours had something supernatural in it. It was unplanned. You know, it made me wonder what was going to happen next. And the events would be different from tour to tour. Like I might do 2 tours a night, and they would be totally different. And there's no explanation for it. I want to mention one of the people that we think primarily haunts the Jenny Wade house, and that is Jenny and George's father, James Wade. James Wade was quite a character. He was kind of a scoundrel. He was a womanizer. He spent time in jail and in prison. They sent him to Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. Now this was a state-of-the-art prison that was supposed to cure people by making them think about God. So they had no contact with anybody. They were not allowed to speak to anybody. They were alone, isolated in a cell. And they were supposed to spend their time there contemplating God and their wrongs and whatever they did. And it ended up being a horrendous form of torture because many of the men went stir crazy in there. Jenny's father was in there for a good while, and when he came out of Eastern State, he was never the same again. They put him in the almshouse in Gettysburg because they had a mental ward in the almshouse, and I guess he never got any better after that. But when he found out that Jenny was killed, he went crazy. I guess he really loved her, and you know, after all, it was his daughter. So he is believed to haunt the Jenny Wade house to this day. And he's associated with the negative energy in that place. We don't know if this is true or not, but we've seen a lot of activity in the basement around her body. Sometimes there'll be flashing lights, like a blue color. And there's a rocking chair in the basement. And that's no big deal, I know. But it doesn't have any rockers on it. It never did, as far as anyone knows. They just came off. But every once in a while, the group sitting down there will see the chair start to rock back and forth, just like it did have rockers on it. It's crazy. Some of the things that happen, and you could be down in the basement and hear people walking up the steps on the interior, and nobody's there because we have to lock the doors when we take the crowd through the house. So there's no way that anybody could get in there. It's a very, very mysterious place. A very personal experience that I had in the basement was one night I was standing near Jenny's body and explaining to the crowd, how they brought her downstairs and covered her with the quilt and everything. And I didn't know this, but in front of me was a huge orb. It covered my whole chest area. It was probably the size of a basketball. I had no idea of this. People were picking it up on their cameras, but I didn't know until after I was done speaking. And that really freaked me out, because they say when you see orbs, it's just dust particles, and they try and, blame it on anything but the supernatural. When I saw that, I got chills. I'll tell you, it was a very, very grainy type orb, and I never saw anything that large as far as an orb goes. Usually they're just little, couple half-inch or something flying around, and you pick them up on the camera. And yes, they could be dust particles, but this certainly was not. And there's many times when I would get chills, like when I was talking about James Wade, and you just never knew what to expect on any given night. It was pretty bizarre. Now, I mentioned in the first story about Jenny that she was buried 3 different times, and this is very true. The first time she was buried out in the backyard in haste, because the battle had just ended and they had to get her underground so her body didn't spoil. And she stayed there until January of 1864. Funny thing is, Jenny's body never decomposed in all those months. She was disinterred, and she still had, dough and flour all over her hands and arms, her apron. They didn't have time to clean her up or anything before they buried her, so she came out of the ground just like she went in. I mean, there was nothing disfiguring about her whatsoever. And this is a real mystery of why this happened. There is one theory, though, that the teenage girls of the time used a concoction made of vinegar, arsenic, and chalk, and they drank it. And I know this sounds very strange, but they drank it because they believed it would make their skin very white and pasty looking, which was in vogue at the time, because this was the Victorian era. And if you had a tan, that means you were a low-class person and you worked out in the fields to get that tan. And so any pure lady of the day would go for this white complexion. I mean, ghostly white complexion. These girls were warned not to drink this concoction, but they did it anyway. With arsenic, I mean, it could have killed them instantly. We'll never know, but we know for sure that it was recorded that Jenny was so well preserved when she was buried at the church cemetery. Now, did it stay this way when she was disinterred again and interred at Evergreen? I don't know. I would love to know the answer to that story. But that's pretty creepy in itself. Some things have been reported to me by some of my people in my tour groups, and they've shown me pictures, and I just can't believe it. I told you that Jenny was supposedly engaged to Jack Skelly, and a man came up to me after the tour, and he said, "Look at this, I got a soldier, Terry. I got a soldier he was in the window," and I took a picture, and honestly, it was a photo of Jack Skelly. One that I've never seen before, but you could tell that's who it was. He was in uniform, and you could distinguish him by his goatee and you know, his soldier uniform. That gave me chills too. We even showed that to my manager and he couldn't believe it. There are so many things in that house. I mean, I could spend probably a good hour telling you about that. But please, if you ever go to Gettysburg, take a ghost tour of the Jenny Wade house. You'll be well pleased, I'm sure. Before I go, I have one more story to tell you. And it's kind of funny in a way, and I hope you enjoy it. When I would talk about the outside of the house, I would go to the north side of the house where all the bullet holes are in the wall. There's about 150 bullet holes there. And I would stand near the door where the bullet penetrated to go into the house that killed Jenny. Now, the bullet hole is much bigger now. It's about the size of a dollar maybe, from everybody putting their fingers in there and wanting to feel where the bullet was and everything. So I would stand on the stoop there and talk about, you know, how the bullet came in, and they believed that it was shot from the Farnsworth house, down the street, from a sniper up in the attic window. We don't know that for sure, however, but that's a pretty good guess. It is said that any young woman who sticks her fingers in the bullet hole will soon to be engaged, and that's in honor of Jack Skelly and Jenny Wade, of course. So one night, it wasn't my tour, but it was another person's tour, and she was standing out on the stoop talking about this tradition. So all of a sudden, you know, a couple of women went up to the bullet hole and stuck their finger in there. And one woman stuck her finger in, and something on the other side of the door grabbed her finger. She let out a blood-curdling scream and pulled her finger out of the door and ran down Baltimore Street screaming at the top of her lungs. And the next day, the local newspaper had an article, "Women scared at Jenny Wade house, ghost pulls her finger." And that was the funniest thing, because no one knew, not even including the guide who was giving the tour, that our manager came in the back way. He came in through the McLean house. The door on the McLean house went upstairs and came down into the Jenny Wade house. And he had a sense of humor, so he grabbed this woman's finger and gave her the fright of her life. So people love this story. They just love it. So come to the Jenny Wade house and see for yourself. You know, it's hard to explain what you feel there, what goes on there, but I'm sure you'll be amazed too. Take care. Thanks for listening. Please tell your friends about us. See you next time. Bye-bye.